In the last video in this series, we talked about ledgers, accounts, transactions, and we took a look at how the blockchain is constructed. In this video, we'll take a closer look at the security and decentralization mechanisms that allow cryptocurrencies to operate securely and entirely trustless. Let's get started. I'm Daniel, a retired meta software engineer, and this is my channel, Gainfully Unemployed, where I make videos about investing, personal finance, and financial freedom. If you want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing and hit the little bell icon if you want to get notifications as soon as new content becomes available. If you would like to watch the other videos in this Cryptocurrency 101 series, please check out the playlist link in the description below. So far, we've talked about the fundamental building blocks like transactions and accounts and how they come together in the blockchain. But we still don't really know how cryptocurrencies make sure that only you can control your cryptocurrency wallet and that you cannot spend more than you actually own. And all of that without requiring any trust among any of the participants in the network. In a traditional centralized system, a large amount of the trust into the system is derived from the trust into the organization running it. For example, we trust our bank account balances because we generally trust our banks. We trust that our bank won't just transfer money in our account to somebody else without our authorization. And others trust that if we transfer money to them, that our bank will actually decrease our account balances accordingly, relinquishing what is known as the double spending problem. And since our bank is the one who exclusively tracks our account balances and transactions, they absolutely would have the power to do so. But we trust them, for better or worse, to not. And since these banks are the sole custodians of our accounts and account balances, we cannot participate in the financial system without us trusting them and them trusting each other. Cryptocurrencies, however, construct a decentralized system that functions entirely trustless and solves all the same problems, like transaction authorization and preventing double spending. No participant in a cryptocurrency network needs to trust any other participant, and yet they can rely on that the network will produce the outcomes that they expect. When I first learned about cryptocurrencies, I thought, that sounds impossible. But after learning more how they work from a technical perspective, I realized that I was wrong. Let's take a closer look at how they work. The security foundation for a decentralized cryptocurrency network is transaction validation. Before transactions can be added to a block and the blockchain, they have to be validated. This includes two main aspects. One, transaction authorization, i.e. is the creator of the transaction authorized to perform the transaction. And two, logical validation, i.e. does the transaction not violate any logical constraints? For example, is there sufficient Bitcoin in the origin wallet of a transfer transaction? Transaction authorization uses public key cryptography, which we briefly talked about in the previous video too. I might do another video in the future that goes into more detail how public-private key cryptography works, since it's a super crucial part of cryptocurrencies. For now, it's good enough to understand that a public-private key pair enables users to create digital signatures. A digital signature is created using the private key and can be verified with the specific associated public key. The private key is only known to the person creating the signature, whereas the public key can be known to anyone. The verification fails if either key used does not match the other. That way, a digital signature can be used to verify that a message or piece of data originated with the holder of a given private key. As we learned in the last episode, cryptocurrency wallets are essentially just private-public key pairs. A wallet creating a new transaction digitally signs the transaction using its associated private key. Since this signature can only be created by a person with access to the private key, i.e. the wallet owner, a validator can now easily prove that a transaction was authorized by the wallet's owner by checking its digital signature. The logical validation is much simpler in practice. The cryptocurrency protocol specifies a set of constraints that cannot be violated by a transaction. For example, you cannot spend Bitcoin that you do not own. So a validator can check that a transaction is authorized and logically valid. That's great, but doesn't that mean that we now just have to trust these validators? Aren't we just replacing banks with validators? Not quite. The main difference is that in a cryptocurrency network, there are many different validators, and anyone can run their own. So does that mean that someone can just come along, spin up their own validator, and then start maliciously validating unauthorized transactions or invalid transactions? Yes, indeed they can, but they won't get very far. And the reason for that is something called consensus. According to the dictionary, consensus means general agreement. And in a cryptocurrency network, a consensus protocol is a formalized process in which the network can agree which transactions are valid and can be added to the next block. The consensus protocol that most people are probably familiar with are elections or other voting mechanisms, like shareholder votes in a publicly traded company. So one reasonable strategy might be to give each validator a vote and have them vote on which transactions they consider valid and which they don't. That will ensure that a single badly acting validator can't just sign off on invalid or unauthorized transactions. While this seems reasonable at first, you will quickly realize that since anybody can just add additional invalidators to the network, that would very quickly lead to malicious actors just flooding the network with additional validators to vote on their forged invalid transactions. You effectively just try to tie the world's financial system to a straw poll. So instead, the consensus protocol requires the validators to prove that they made a significant resource investment to be able to participate in the voting process, and then scales their voting power according to how many resources they invested. The resource required by the Bitcoin and Ethereum network is computing power, or work. Validators need to provide a proof of work to be able to validate transactions and put them into the next block. Note that there are also other consensus protocols that require different resource investments other than proof of work. For example, the Ethereum network is famously currently moving to a proof of stake consensus protocol. In this video, we will only take a closer look at how proof of work works though. Validators are required to provide a proof of work to validate transactions and create a new block. Generating this proof of work requires solving what is commonly referred to as a cryptographic puzzle. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that in just a bit. For now, know that it requires a little bit of luck and is computationally expensive to find a solution to this puzzle. And thus, if you can produce this solution, you have proven that you invested the computing resources to generate it. The validator that finds the solution first will be able to create the next block. It does so by adding the solution to the block, linking it to the previous block, and then digitally signing everything. The other validators in the network can now easily check if the block is valid by checking if the solution to the puzzle is correct and all the transactions within the block are valid too. If all of that checks out, they will accept the new block and continue building the blockchain off of this new block. However, if there's something off, like the block contains invalid transactions or the solution to the puzzle isn't correct, they will reject the block and continue searching for a solution to the puzzle for the current block. Generating a canonical validation of a block, i.e. creating a new block, is computationally expensive, whereas checking the canonical validation for correctness is computationally cheap. This makes it uneconomical to try to generate blocks that contain invalid or unauthorized transactions. The malicious actor would spend a lot of compute resources to try to generate a block that contains these invalid transactions, just for the network to then reject it. At the core of the proof of work consensus protocol is the so-called cryptographic puzzle. But how does it work? Well, let me explain. During the last episode, we already learned about cryptographic hashes. And as I mentioned then, cryptographic hashes are used everywhere in cryptography. Cryptographic puzzles are no exception. One of the properties of cryptographic hashes that we touched on during the last episode is that it's computationally cheap to compute one, but computationally expensive, if not impossible, to go backwards from a hash to the original data. A cryptographic puzzle can utilize this property of a hash by creating the following challenge for a potential solver. Given a specific piece of data D and a constraint C, find a padding P for which C of hash of D plus P is true. Or in more practical terms, find an arbitrary padding that when appended to a given piece of data, for example a block of transactions, will yield a hash that fulfills a certain set of constraints. For example, it starts with a specific predefined sequence of characters. Since the hash function is not reversible, it's not possible to solve this problem algebraically. The only way to solve this puzzle is to brute force it by repeatedly generating arbitrary padding data, appending to the given data, and then checking if the generated hash matches the constraints. If not, you discard your padding data and repeat the process. You repeat this process until you find a padding that generates a hash that fulfills the constraints. This padding is the solution to the puzzle. Validators compete to find a solution to exactly this challenge. The upcoming block is padded with arbitrary data, hashed, and the resulting hash is required to start with a given number of 0 bits. The challenge can be made harder or easier by increasing or decreasing the required number of bits. Finding a hash that starts with only 1 0 bit is significantly easier than finding a hash that starts with, say, 10. The process of repeatedly trying to solve this puzzle is called mining, and the validators that participated are called miners. You may have heard the term hash rate before. It describes how many hashes a computer system can compute in a given unit of time. Since finding a solution to the cryptographic puzzle requires one to repeatedly compute hashes until a hash matches the given constraints, having access to a high hash rate is crucial to finding a solution quickly. The architecture of graphics cards is relatively well suited for solving these cryptographic puzzles, and even consumer-grade GPUs can easily achieve hash rates in dozens of millions of hashes per second, measured in mega hashes. Specialized mining hardware, however, can easily achieve hash rates that is 1,000,000 times higher than that, measured in terahashes. Large industrial mining operations can deploy thousands of these specialized rigs and achieve hash rates in the range of petahashes. But outside of the altruistic motivation of keeping the blockchain secure, why would anybody even want to participate in this race to finding the solution to the cryptographic puzzle, let alone try to win it? The answer to this, of course, is monetary gain. As we have touched on in the first episode in this series, link in the description, finding a solution to the cryptographic puzzle and creating the next block yields a reward to the miner who does so. This reward comes in two parts: a block reward and transaction fees. The block reward is a specific predefined amount of cryptocurrency that the miner of the block can deposit into their wallet. On the Bitcoin network, this block reward goes down over time. And as of publishing this video, it's 6.5 Bitcoin for every newly minted block. This is also the process in which new Bitcoin is created. Once a total supply of 21 million Bitcoin has been generated, the block reward will go to zero. And the only reward left for the miners are transaction fees. Transaction fees function like a bounty for miners. The miner of a successfully mined block gets to keep the transaction fees of all the transactions contained in that block. This incentivizes miners to continue mining even when the block reward fades. And it also helps to self-regulate the network in times of high load. If there are more transactions than the network can handle, then naturally the transactions with higher transaction fees will be included in blocks by miners. In the unlikely event of multiple miners mining the next block at the same time, the blockchain will temporarily fork, meaning that there are now two valid heads of the blockchain. To achieve eventual consistency, miners will only be mining on the longest chain, since it's increasingly unlikely that the next set of blocks on each of the forks will be found at the same time. One of the forks will eventually become longer. This longest chain rule also prevents malicious actors from trying to rewrite parts of the blockchain history. If a malicious miner started mining new blocks off of a historical block in an attempt to discard all the other blocks that had been mined off of it already since, then this newly created chain would be immediately shorter than the already existing one, and it would be impossible for the miner to achieve the longest chain. Or is it? Overcoming the longest chain rule is only impossible if no attacker can produce more hashing power than the rest of the network combined. Should an attacker or group of attackers be able to produce more than 50% of the hashing power of the network, they would be able to overpower the honest miners in the network, successfully split the blockchain, and maintain the longest chain. Doing so would give them an opportunity to double spend and prevent certain transactions from being added to the blockchain. A 51% attack is considered by many the Achilles heel of blockchain technology. Having your cryptocurrency backed by a large, high hash rate network is crucial in protecting against these types of attacks. It is also the reason why smaller cryptocurrencies are more prone to these attacks. This becomes even more disastrous if a smaller cryptocurrency uses the same hashing algorithm as a larger one. The very large hash rate infrastructure that exists to support the larger cryptocurrency could easily be redeployed to attack the smaller. For the largest existing cryptocurrency networks like Bitcoin or Ethereum, however, there are no recorded incidents of 51% attacks. And the sheer hashing power that these networks have would make it prohibitively expensive to try to attack them. This was the second part in my Cryptocurrency 101 series. In this video, we learned about cryptocurrency security by looking at how trust is modeled in a decentralized system. We talked about consensus protocols, proof of work, mining and mining rewards, as well as how the longest chain rule works and what a 51% attack is. In the next video, we'll take a closer look at smart contracts and how they enable more advanced technologies like NFTs and DAOs. I will link to the video from the pinned comment below once it becomes available. If this video was useful to you, please leave a like for the YouTube algorithm. If there's anything I missed or you have any additional questions that you would like me to answer, please leave a comment below. And if you would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon to get notified as soon as new content becomes available. Thanks for watching and see you next time. I am Daniel and this is my channel, Gainfully Unemployed.